Health officials are still telling the public and media that the presence of naturally occurring asbestos across much of southern Nevada is nothing to worry about and is in no way a risk to public health.
But is that what they're saying behind the scenes? And if so, how did they reach this conclusion? Well, it took 5 months of pestering and a threat of legal action, but the I-team managed to get the internal emails from top state health officials, and what it contained in those emails is surprising to say the least.
George Knapp is here with a preview of his latest investigation.
Well, the state didn't make it easy for us to get this stuff, to obtain these records. Took about 5 months, and we had to retain the services of an attorney named Colleen McCarty, you might remember that name from the I-team, to finally get this material. And once we saw the emails, it was obvious why they dragged their feet. As we've been reporting previously, the state issued a cease and desist order back in 2012 to stop a team of scientists from releasing a paper about a possible link between natural asbestos found over a wide area of southern Nevada and certain kinds of disease. State health honchos told the I-team and others they would never censor scientific research, no matter what it showed. Their only concern, they said, was that the researchers had violated their contract by not allowing the state to review their findings prior to publication. But in the emails we obtained, the state epidemiologist said, quote, "That wouldn't have been a big deal for us, except for the fact that her research was surprisingly erroneous." Around the country, scientists and journalists have been watching this story play out and are appalled that a state agency would set itself up as the arbiter of truth and would impose censorship because it did not agree with the study. People in other states disgusted by how the state government treated you and
Yeah,
Rod?
I would say surprised, disheartened, shocked.
Federal officials, health folks, have you heard from them?
All kinds of people from all different walks of life are surprised and upset.
The reaction could be even stronger once we release the other emails later tonight. State officials discussed plans for character assassination of UNLV professors Brenda Buck and Rod Metcalf. State health officials implied that these two were committing scientific fraud. They also discussed plans to hire a spin doctor in order to manipulate public opinion, and gave information out to journalists, even to their boss, the governor, that is flat out misleading. In one email, the epidemiologist referred to asbestos concerns as a, quote, "a made-up issue," which puts him directly at odds with the federal EPA, most public health agencies, and even other state agencies. Tonight at 11, the internal emails the state did not want to release. You want to check this out.
That's really disappointing.
Yep.
See you at 11.
Okay.
George.
Two UNLV geology professors say they are appalled to learn that they've been targeted for ridicule and possible character assassination by a state agency.
Professors Brenda Buck and Rod Metcalf, both medical geologists with PhDs, are the scientists who discovered vast deposits of natural asbestos around southern Nevada. But that put them at odds with state health officials who have insisted that asbestos poses no health risk to the public.
Now the 8 News Now I-team has obtained more than 100 pages of emails from inside the Department of Health and Human Services, and what those emails reveal is a shocker. Chief Investigator George Knapp is here with the exclusive story.
Well, it took us more than 5 months and the help of an attorney to get these emails, and we now understand why the state didn't really want to make it easy. The central question is this: should a government agency be the gatekeeper, deciding which scientific studies can or can't be published? Scientific censorship flies in the face of what science is supposed to be. Nevada health officials flat out didn't like a scientific paper that said natural asbestos might be killing people. The state issued a cease and desist order against researcher Dr. Francine Bauman of Hawaii and her colleagues, the two UNLV professors. The state has always denied that it took the action because it disagreed with the findings, but the internal emails show that is precisely what they did. And the emails show they also discussed a plan to slime the scientists' good names.
The cease and desist was unrelated to the data. It was unrelated to the risk. It was unrelated to the conclusions. It was a process issue.
When the I-Team sat down with state health officials to talk about the cease and desist order issued in 2012 to stop a research paper from being made public, we were told several times that the order had nothing to do with the content of the paper, that the state would never censor science. But internal emails make it clear it was all about the content. In this 2014 email, state epidemiologist Dr. Izan Azam said, quote, "It wouldn't have been a big deal that Francine Bauman was going to publish her paper, except for the fact that her research was, quote, erroneous and invalid. That's why the state tried to stop the paper." Another email from a senior staffer this year said, "This isn't about the state versus science. It's about the misuse and misinterpretation of the data. The state censored the paper because it disagreed with the findings."
I work in France, but I've never seen that public data you could be forbidden for.
State officials showed remarkable ignorance about their own actions. Chief Medical Officer Dr. Tracy Green informed the governor's office that the cease and desist did not deny access to the cancer registry, though that is precisely what it said. Then Green asks a staff member to double-check whether it did or didn't. A scathing email was written by Jay Kavam listing talking points for the governor following our I-Team reports in May, denying that the cease and desist order ever applied to UNLV professors Brenda Buck and Rod Metcalf, which is flat out wrong. The order applies to Francine Bauman and her colleagues and is even CC'd to Rod Metcalf. In a January email to a reporter, Dr. Azam seems to take credit for Buck and Metcalf's discovery of asbestos, saying, quote, "Now that we have discovered naturally occurring asbestos, we'll make certain we keep our eyes open and intensify our research." Again and again, the public face of the health division is one of concern with the asbestos issue. By early 2014, the state had developed a list of talking points, which it relied on whenever there was a media request. "We truly care about our people and love our citizens," Dr. Azam wrote. "Our mission is to keep them safe." Yet his disdain for the asbestos debate was made pretty clear multiple times, including this internal email in which he characterized the whole thing as, quote, "a made-up issue." State health officials have dispensed some bad information to the public, showing a glaring lack of familiarity with asbestos research. After a constituent wrote to the governor expressing concerns about asbestos around Boulder City, Dr. Green wrote back that almost all who develop asbestos disease are exposed to high levels over long periods of time.
Therein lies a conundrum with asbestos. You know, a lot of people think, oh, it's really low, we shouldn't really worry about that. That's not true. That's just not true.
Nationally known asbestos researcher Dr. Aubrey Miller was among dozens of top scientists in town last month to consider asbestos issues. Everyone at the conference knew about the state censorship of Buck and Metcalf, both of whom were invited to speak at the event. Dr. Miller and other speakers agreed with what Buck and Metcalf have tried to tell the state, namely that even very low levels of asbestos in the ground can cause major risks to public health.
I bet it's full of fibers.
For years, the two professors have asked to work with the state on asbestos issues. Health officials ignored them.
And again, I don't have this letter.
When we asked Dr. Green why she'd never answered a letter from Buck in 2014, Green denied ever receiving it. Yet here it is, in the emails we obtained from Green's computer. All through the 4 years of emails, state officials take potshots at the UNLV professors. One talking points memo they prepared for the governor refers to the professors as mere geologists who stepped outside their field of expertise to make public health claims. Worse still is that after Buck and Metcalf appeared in news reports, the state began to formulate a plan to respond to them, including hiring a prominent spin doctor to help shape the public narrative. One senior staff member wrote that he saw many parallels between Buck and Metcalf and a disgraced vaccine researcher named Andrew Wakefield, the implication being that Buck and Metcalf were also frauds. The staffer wrote that he'd done background research on Wakefield to see if it can be applied to what we're seeing unravel down in Boulder City. When we told the two professors about these attacks on their integrity by a state agency, they were appalled.
Yeah, I would say surprised, disheartened, shocked.
people can justify things a lot in their mind, that we're, you know, we're just after big grants and we're trying to draw attention to ourselves and things. This is not the, this kind of science is not the easiest science to do. It's stressful. I'm not real fond of doing TV interviews, to tell you the truth.
The emails prove that top health officials sort of staked out a position right from the beginning and then dug in their heels, even though other agencies, including NDOT, RTC, and the federal EPA, took a very different position on asbestos, accepting the fact that asbestos is a threat to public health and needs to be studied. Instead of agreeing to work with the asbestos investigators, the state rejected all invitations to collaborate. They launched instead a public relations campaign instead of doing the research. Monday night at 11, we'll tell you how they repeatedly defied their boss, Governor Sandoval, who wanted them to take a closer look at the asbestos issue. Our requests, by the way, for an interview with the state were not met.
These emails, George, did they mention George Knapp?
Oh, yeah. I'm not their favorite reporter.
No.
I'm not going to go into details on that, but maybe we'll get around to it.
Quite revealing. Yeah. Thanks, George.
Nevada's Department of Health and Human Services might be facing tough questions once the governor learns about the content of their internal emails. Messages obtained from state computers show high-ranking officials displayed contempt for those who disagreed with them about asbestos issues.
The 8 News Now I-Team requested all emails to or from the 2 top officials at the health agency. Those officials have insisted the public has nothing to worry about because of natural asbestos deposits in southern Nevada, even though other state agencies and outside experts strongly disagree. How far did these officials go to make sure their opinions prevailed? Their emails spell it out. George is here with the story.
You know, scientists, we hope, are open-minded, willing to follow the evidence wherever it leads. That's not the way it's been working at our state health agency. The emails we obtained show a disturbing pattern of snarky and personal attacks on those who question these officials, a willingness to pursue public relations campaigns instead of research, and a deception that allowed them to sidestep an outside independent review of their work on asbestos, even when that review was ordered by the governor of Nevada.
It's probably fortunate that Nevada Governor Brian Sandoval has never been interviewed about asbestos, because if he had relied on the talking points given to him by state health officials, it could have been a major embarrassment. Ever since naturally occurring asbestos was discovered in southern Nevada, state health officials have struggled to control the narrative. Never once in the scores of emails obtained by the I-Team do state officials ask themselves whether they might be wrong about the health risks. Instead, they focused on how to convince everyone else that they were right. From the beginning, they developed an ever-changing list of talking points. This is the earliest version, and this is the latest, which was written for the governor a few days after our I-Team reports aired back in May. The talking points email blasted our news stories for being sensationalistic and biased. It also attacked the 2 UNLV professors for creating panic and hysteria. Earlier, Chief Medical Officer Tracy Green opined that she and her staff looked solid in the news stories, while the reporter looked crazy. That same day, Green got an email from the governor's chief of staff, Mike Wilden, informing her that the governor wanted her to sit down for a follow-up with this reporter. But Green defied the governor, saying she didn't think such a meeting would be productive. It wasn't the only time she and her staff blew off a directive from the boss. Governor Sandoval has shown a keen interest in the asbestos flap. He's been a strong proponent of building the I-11 bypass, which, it turns out, plows right through the heart of the asbestos fields discovered by UNLV medical geologists Brenda Buck and Rod Metcalf. When the state heard that Buck and Metcalf were working on a paper suggesting a possible link between asbestos in the desert and elevated levels of disease, state officials shut them down, forbid the team from talking about their findings in public, and barred them from accessing the Nevada Cancer Registry. State health officers intimated in emails that Buck and Metcalf might be engaged in scientific fraud, comparable to disgraced vaccine researcher Andrew Wakefield. But that wasn't the opinion of another state agency, the Department of Transportation, NDOT, which hired the 2 to study asbestos for the I-11 project.
We were surprised that this segment of the state was interested in the asbestos, and the other segment, said that cease working on it.
Unlike their counterparts in the health agencies, NDOT took the asbestos issue very seriously, which is why it suspended the highway project for a year and spent millions of dollars to protect workers from asbestos exposure during construction. Health officials, who had told the public many times that the asbestos posed no risk, period, reluctantly had to change their position.
We've never said that the occupational workers or the construction workers could not be at increased risk. We've never said that.
Well, you said there's no risk, no increased risk.
To the community.
It wasn't the only time words were parsed by health officials, which might explain why in January 2014, the governor said he wanted to see an independent agency review the asbestos data, a request that caused a bit of a tizzy. Not sure why the governor is requesting this, one emailer remarked, but they quickly came up with an idea for sidestepping the boss again. Get Paulo to do it. That first name appears throughout the health agency emails, so familiar to his colleagues that there's no need to mention his last name. Dr. Paulo Pinheiro is a UNLV epidemiologist who has repeatedly been touted by health officials as an independent investigator, not affiliated with state health, Dr. Green told us. But as the I-Team discovered, Dr. Pinheiro has accepted tens of thousands of dollars in grants from Green's agency, and he's listed as the official epidemiologist for the Nevada Cancer Registry, which Dr. Green oversees. Back in 2012, when the state first learned that Dr. Francine Baumann was working on a paper about asbestos, this email went out to all senior staff at the agency, including Dr. Pinheiro. The topic: we need to discuss our next step in dealing with Dr. Baumann. That next step turned out to be the cease and desist order. Pinheiro became the go-to guy when the state needed something to counter the evidence that natural asbestos might be a danger to public health. In February, Pinheiro exchanged multiple emails in which he was asked to write to a medical journal to rebut an article by Francine Baumann. Still, the agency pretended it was all done independently. It needs to be initiated by him, Tracy Green wrote, not at our request, even though Pinheiro had already been asked to do so days earlier.
In addition to this subterfuge on one of their close colleagues to carry out a supposedly independent review, state officials also wanted the CDC to endorse their viewpoint. They asked over and over in emails and letters, and finally, CDC said, no, we won't do it. But even so, state officials have made public statements many times to the effect that CDC agrees with their analysis about asbestos, though that is simply not true. We'll show you some of those emails and others from the EPA in the days ahead. Of course, if you'd like more information about asbestos issues, our documentary, Deadly Dust, can be viewed on our website.
Well worth for viewing.
A lot of these documents on our website?
We're going to put them all on the website the days ahead, by the end of the week.
Thanks, George.
Sure.